Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Software Development and Architecture Podcast. Our guest today is Kramer. Kramer is the founder and chief product officer of Cooperative Computing. Kramer is dedicated to transforming lives as the father of nine, still married to this wonderful girl, and lives in Dallas, Texas. We've had Kramer on our podcast before. Kramer, thanks for taking the time. Looking forward to this chat.
Excited to be here.
I know you've had, plenty of travels recently, which is why we had a gap in our podcast. Welcome back to the country.
It's good to be
So
back.
to sort of hit the ground running, uh, do you want to share anything about your travel? Like just what anything fun about your travel to Down Under?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two highlights. One, it's wonderful to be there in their summertime when it was 70 degrees and we were freezing here. That was one. But two, as we have been talking through all the subjects, both from an economic perspective and a technology perspective, I've been going there for almost 2 years, and I've gotten to see the evolution of what's happening as more traditional services that are provided by the government are starting to be hyper automated. They're starting to become a part of this automated economy. Um, uh, I can walk through the New Zealand airport start to finish now, right in Auckland. It's not a large airport, but when I first got there, that process would take me anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes. I can now go through that same process in about 8, right? So it's very exciting as I travel to different countries. Dubai, you see the acceleration of the services that are being provided. New Zealand, made a trip into Chile, and you're starting to watch a lot of economies now that are adopting the things that allow this acceleration to happen. So I just think it's fun to watch that evolution kick in and be a part of seeing it as I start to become aged and start to see a couple generations worth of stuff happening. It's really exciting to watch what's going on in the automated economy.
I'm going to ask you a question that might sound very simple, but I'm going to add a twist to it to make it very difficult. What is the most what is the most delicious thing that you ate in New Zealand? And before you answer the question, thinking it's an easy question, I'm going to make it harder. It's got to be vegetarian.
Uh, the most delicious vegetarian I ate, they have a little Thai restaurant. And in that Thai restaurant, they have these little rolls, or they're balls. They're kind of like a vegetable roll, and absolutely delicious. The skin around it was made of some sort of cabbage, but they had something intertwined with it. It was really fantastic. And on the inside, they had diced up vegetables. They'd done a good job of curating the tofu. I'm not traditionally a big lover of tofu, but man, they really made it good. And so it was absolutely phenomenal
Oh, it sounds
that we ate
so. Is
that.
it different from here, the Thai food, or is it very similar?
Um, no, it was quite a bit different. The place that I like, I stayed at Mount Maunganui, and the place that I like going to is called Rice Race Baby. And the flavor of that food is very different from what we have here. Much softer tones, not quite as spicy, but also delicious food. It's probably one of the better places to eat there on the Mount.
Lovely. I know that even the part of the world looks and sounds beautiful. But nice to have you back. Welcome back to the country. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. The last time we spoke about a month ago, we talked about many different things. But let me share the screen really quick to jog all our memories, including the folks who are actually watching this. So, let me share my screen here. Just as a quick recap, we talked about uh, the impact of automated economy. Kramer shared his presentation with some details. We took some numbers out of it. We put that into this diagram where we sized up, the countries, the impact of automated economy on countries, and roughly the size of these circles is a reflection of the impact that automated economy is expected to have in the near, short term, and long term future on these countries. As you can see here, I had a lot of surprises as Kramer was giving us these ballpark numbers, and we jotted down. India, as it turns out, is the largest circle here. So we talked about it. For folks who haven't watched it, highly recommend you do so you get a bit more context to this conversation. So we are going to pick up from where we sort of left off, give or take. There's a few topics, and then the idea is to dig deeper into different facets of this conversation that we are beginning to have. Because in the last, I think this is the fourth or the fifth podcast, we are talking about automated economy, and as we progress further, we'll take different items and talk issues that's in the space, but sort of outside the higher level conversations you've had. So I just want to set the context, Kramer, to that. If you want to add something before we start the actual conversation, we can do that, or we can just jump right.
No, the only thing that I think we should add is that over the last week and a half, you've seen China, I think it's $139 billion that has been stated to flee from China into India. And so it just reinforces some of what is beginning to occur and what's happening with GDP growth. And there's some very specific, causes behind that. So it's just exciting to watch some of this start to occur and start to do so in a way that we're starting to predict.
Lovely. The last 2 days I've been completely distracted. The only thing I've been looking at the last 2 days was NVDNA on Google. Just nothing else. Nobody else is talking about anything else. What is going on, right? Literally, it's just been a frenzy in the market, so to speak. So this is good. Okay, so what we'll do is, you mentioned, again, we talked about India as a circle where things are happening. So one of the things I want to talk about was the problems that we have to look to solve. One of the things that's of interest is, hey, I'm starting my career. Uh, the current day and age, Gen Z and Alpha, the notion of at least wanting to work for large organizations, at least if I could summarize my takeaways, has changed from over the years. When I went to school and graduated, you were looking at these big product companies and you want to work for them. I don't know if that's necessarily the case today, even with this Magnificent Seven and more companies coming into the mix. I think, in my mind, the next generations are willing to work for smaller organizations, take more responsibility, uh, and the work styles and patterns have changed. So one of the things is they want to be entrepreneurs at much earlier ages than at least I've seen. I don't know if you agree, Kramer, than it's been in the past. With that as premise, I want to talk about, with your travels, with your experience, with the breadth of experience, what are some problems that folks should look to solve? Like, if you have to, just kick off the conversation with, in the next 6 months, a year, 2 years, I'm trying to start a business, maybe I'm trying to solve problems, I'm trying to build software. How do I change the way I'm looking to find these problems in this world of automated economy?
Yeah, and I think this is a great question, especially as the what I call the world of entrepreneurism that used to belong to a set of graduates from, these um, uh, alpha schools, if you will. Right? If you weren't from one of these five, then being an entrepreneur was really hard to do, right? And what we're seeing today is that entrepreneurialism is starting to take a separate course around what can I solve and how do I get that solution done. And I think something we mentioned really early on, right, is the risk of failure has gone down. With a credit card and $2,500, you can do some amazing things. Test that out, get to know your buyer, get to understand the buyer and the problems you're solving, and start generating, some fundamental income that can grow rapidly because of the borderless nature of how the digital economy is coming to bear. So if we think about specifically what it is that if you're a young, either graduate student, you've been working inside an office with a company for some period of time, whether you did it remotely or not, and you're like, I'd like to jump out on my own and see what I can do, right? There's two key factors I think that are important to think about in what we call this automated economy. One, as the natural evolution of what we're doing in the economic space, whether that's B2C or B2B, starts to become what I want, right? When I want it, at the value I want it. Those were the things we said that are driving the economy. And you start to look at what that looks like. As an entrepreneur, the problems that you can start to solve are right in front of you every day as you either approach the business life that you're in today or you approach the different things that you're doing in your life. And usually the people that are closest to what it is that's frustrating them are the people that can start to be very curious, right? And so curiosity is really key. And that curiosity then can lead to the ability for you to do discovery. We're in a world of unlimited information. And so you can become a advanced uh, subject matter expert in a very short amount of time because you can start to ask software questions you couldn't get answered before unless you sat through, a university class or you found someone to actually collaborate with. So the access to that information and the ability for you to test something out quickly allows you to accelerate against your problem solving, right? So
Great.
let's take what's occurring in the world of um, retail sales, right? So there are some key attributes of what's occurring in retail sales. As let's take a typical retailer. Let's take someone like a Nike or Adidas or someone like that that would traditionally be sold through either a retail outlet or their own, right? And so all of their supply chains, everything they did and built around how to model that supply chain was built around getting things from the manufacturer through your distribution systems in bulk out to these regional distribution centers that then got you to the consumer. But that consumer showed up at a point of sale system on a cash register. And so you would try to get inside some place that had as many people showing up to the cash register buying your product as possible because the economies of scale that you got out of that were tremendous. But then you started to see this digital world and you realize that if I don't do something and don't understand how to play in the online market space, I could quickly be replaced by someone who's figured that out and I could become something like Montgomery Ward or Sears and Roebuck's, someone in the
Right.
retail space that had leader advantage, had catalogs in everybody's home. There should have been no reason why Montgomery Ward wouldn't be the leader in doing what Amazon has done, but they didn't. But what you see is that transition occurs as you start to take what a retailer does and they start to go into the digital economy. The supply chains are drastically different. And so now you have mixed mode supply chain management. You have your order management systems that are trying to figure out where to place inventory and move inventory around. So it is, I think, critical for the entrepreneur of the future to understand in the space of the economy and how it's operating, right? Where are the opportunities to let hyperautomation, how to take that hyper automation and wire it to data driven decisions and then hyper personalize it. As you think around those three key concepts and you understand the buyer space that you're in, you can start to make advances on an incremental basis in the world that you're playing in, and you can do so and generate income in a way that you could never do before. So let's go to some specifics on two key concepts. One, the problems that you want to solve. Okay. In the automated economy, as you start to look across what is happening in a economic space that you may deal with day in and day out, right? That problem probably has surfaced as a global problem in other countries, other places that are similar in nature. So if I'm in India, I got a large population. That large population has a growing number of people who are middle income. Therefore, they have disposable income and they can start to become a part of that economic outcome in a much more advanced way. Well, what are some of the policies in the country that prohibit growth? And how are those policies, how can they be affected? And how can things start to emerge within those that will start to break those policies down? Let's take, for example, the buying and trading of fuel into the economy. So as India grows, its consumption of fuel is going to increase. As that consumption of that fuel increases, right? And that fuel doesn't necessarily mean just by oil. It means any way that I can try to drive energy growth for a growing population that's going to consume it. And as you're closer to what that problem set looks like, and you start to think about how to take your capabilities and start to evolve your knowledge and understanding, and how you would start to apply it to that problem, the best way to do it is just start doing it. Deeply immerse yourself in the tools that let you model out and simulate different energy systems, whether they be solar, whether they be air, whether they be geothermal. But start to evolve yourself in the things that you have a passion about and understand them, because you have access to wisdom and information that was never available before that can accelerate how quickly you know something, and you don't have the legacy mindset prohibiting you saying, oh, that can't be done, that can't be done. So, one, gain knowledge on something you're passionate about as a problem and evolve quickly your understanding of what the limitations are. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, become boundaryless on how to solve those problems. The places
Okay.
where answers will come from are going to be tied to people who are fearless in their approach to solve the problem, right? Uh, I can't raise capital. Have you tried to pick up the phone and tell someone about your idea and get access to someone? In the old days, you'd have to go through the VC, you'd have to get, seed funding. There are ways now to get access to economic funds for ideas that were never available before. And it's okay to dream different and say, you know what, I'm going to monetize my seed funding in a different way. And so, one, be passionate about the problem. Two, be outside the box on your approach to how to solve the problem and go after it as quickly as you can with the ability to fail fast, get back up, and try it again. Fail fast, get back up, and try it again. I think, Chris, in your world, some of the things that I've watched with you that have been amazing is, I'll go test something. And if it doesn't work, I'll go test it a different way. And if that doesn't work, I'll test it a different way. And you'll go through 5 or 6 of those iterations, right? Until you find the best outcome. And that best outcome that you find for one thing quite often can be applied to 100 things. So you didn't just solve one problem, you solved 100 problems. And
Absolutely.
the way
You know,
that you've done that is brute force.
You know what, Kramer, the great set of points that you laid out there. I made some mental notes. I want to, we can get into each of those items. So, a lot of points there, a lot of points there. So, let's say I want to start with some of them. I made a mental note and some I wrote down here as well. One of the things is you said be passionate about the problems you're solving. You also mentioned being boundaryless, and then you're working, towards solving those problems. Here's my question, and I'm sort of going to play the devil's advocate, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. So during this conversation, uh, when we and you also mentioned creativity, be creative about solving problems. Now, I've seen cases where we've solved a problem a certain way, let's say in the US, and then I've seen that I take India as an example, but I've seen that in other countries as well. The same problems get to be solved a few years down the road, perhaps, by a different company. But the problem itself is not unique, and the solution is not unique either. There is an Amazon.com in India, it's called Flipkart.com, it's called something else. So to me, they are identical products serving a different economy. So, my first question to you, you're back from your travels, so I'm going to make your life difficult. I'm just kidding. My first question to you is, why should I even be creative? I mean, I'm like, if I'm sitting there trying to solve a problem, can I not look at another place? Can I not look at the US, for instance, and look for problems and solutions and take those problems and solutions and localize the problems to build my company? What are some pros and cons of doing that versus trying to be creative and solving a new problem? Like, in other words, if I told this, it's very preposterous, but I'm going to say it regardless. I'm going to come and tell you, Kramer, why should I solve new problems? I'm going to take the exact same problem. I'm just going to solve it again in a different part of the world. What What are your thoughts on that approach?
First and foremost, it's a great question. And I think and that approach to saying take a problem that's solved somewhere else and apply it to the local problem I'm seeing is the fastest way to advance your personal wealth by doing so and learning from things outside your economy. For example, El Salvador has said, hey, we're going to take our economy and we're going to tie it to a whole different system than the cash-based system. Now, they do tie it to the US dollar as well, but they're going to say, I'm going to take this and I'm going to tie it to Bitcoin, right? And you can watch that. You can see it evolve. You can see what comes of it. You can watch some of the things they had to solve by putting an ATM machine so you could use ATM transactions at the Bitcoin machine, if you will. So as you watch that, you see that that's becoming something that is valuable to that economy, right? There's no reason not to understand all the aspects of that and where you could apply it in an alternate country. But you really have to be A, passionate about that. That is a hard journey. And B, thinking outside the box is crucial as you take those capabilities and you put them into another economic situation, if you were another country. For example, payment systems and in Africa, the mobile phone without a screen, just the number pad and a little screen, is a primary means of doing 90% of their economic trade. They use it all the time. They've invented ways to do that. Why? Because it's much cheaper for the average person to own, and the cell networks that deliver service to those devices are very readily available. Now, if you take that problem that they've solved there and you understand it and why they've understood it, there's probably 3 or 4 economies identical to that same set of conditions where you could take that problem and apply that solution somewhere else. So, to your point, is there value? One, do I have to solve new problems? No, but you still have to be passionate about it because it's going to be hard work no matter what. Two, do you have to think outside the box in how it was technically solved? No, there's probably solutions in place that you can take and reuse in those alternative economies. But the way that you do it may require you to think outside the box on the implementation strategies as you want to get them out to the consumer and the way that the consumer is going to use it. So
You know,
you've hit it on the head. The fastest way to grow wealth is find a problem someone solved in one place, take it to an alternative location, and accelerate the consumption of that and become a part of that monetization strategy behind it.
Kramer, your answer was spot on there. And I have this challenge where I want to, my natural self wants to react to the answer as I feel that reaction. But in the interest of not interrupting your thought flows, I actually keep my reactions back. I'm just letting you know because I would have interrupted you to share my reaction like a minute ago because you said something. I think it's very important. I'm going to just say it in my own words, just to capture it the way I would also understand it too. Just saying the same thing a little bit differently. The thing you mentioned was I asked you whether you need to be creative. Your answer was, well, even if you're not being super creative, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but hopefully I'm not losing the essence of it. Let me know if I'm taking the same problem. I'm not looking for new solutions because each of us is built differently, right? To each our own. Some of us are more creative than others, but there is value in being creative. There's no second. That's if you can, and if you are, you should be that. But if you're not as creative as everybody as you probably want to be, there is still room for growth and running a business is what you're saying, because I can take problems that have been solved elsewhere. And your example of the payment systems without smartphones in Africa is a great example because yep, there we have solved payment systems years ago, right? There's companies Stripe and plenty of other gateways that we've had, but how they approach the solving of that problem is probably more applicable to perhaps the US, maybe to the West, and to other countries that are growing at a slightly faster pace. How do you take that same problem, have a solution, but that fits the narrative of the local population and localize it on a phone that's not necessarily a smartphone? That's a great point. But the one other thing you said there was even more interesting to me, which is you still have to be creative in the solving of that problem, even though at the surface level you're like, you know what, hey, you know what, there is this thing that's been already solved, what do I even have to think? But that's never the case, right? Because when you're building software, when someone says, Krish, build this web app, does, I don't know, it's got a page, it's got some buttons, it's got stuff done. There's two approaches to solving that problem. One is, as I think Jason mentioned in the podcast I had before, a developer versus an engineering mindset. Do I take the problem as yep, it's been done dime a dozen times. I'm not going to think I'm just going to solve it the same way I've done it over the years. Or do I try to understand where Kramer's coming from, where cooperative computing is coming from, why you're solving that problem today, even though the page might look a little bit similar to pages I may have built in the past. I still need to dig deeper, understand what's in Kramer's mind to produce the best possible software. So it's still an uncreative problem if I looked at it as a building a web page one more time, but it's still a creative problem because everybody builds the same page ever so slightly different. At least that's my reference to it from a development standpoint. I don't know what I mean. Does it make sense? First of all, Kramer.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that allows us as a species to do what we do, because a dog is always going to react the same way over and over and over again. But the
Right.
human species gets to innovate at the moment in time that we're innovating. And what we had available to us even 6 months ago compared to what we have available to us today allows that innovation mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset to engage, right? And actually tackle the same problem, right? The reason I'm using a cell phone is the cost of the terminal and the easy access to the cell network versus something else, right? The ability to solve a problem that I handled in that manner when I apply it to the next problem that is identical as humans, we get to innovate what that looks like. There is a technology called Rabbit, I think is the name of it. And what it is, it's what they are is they're a different operating system and how they're going to interact. And the purpose of this technology, right? It's a man-machine interface, is you speak to it and it can engage your applications for you. And so what they've done is they've said instead of trying to unwire all the things that you have on your application desktop, whether it's a mobile device or a desktop device, is we figured out how to wire this in front of that interface for you. So you say, hey, I'd like to order pizza from Pizza Hut on my way home. And can you make certain check with the cleaners? I need to see if my clothes are ready for pickup. And can you tell my wife that I'm on the way home and that she needs to pick up John today after basketball practice? And you speak to this device. And this device is not trying to figure out how to wire a bunch of agents into all the tech that has to have that happen. It's figured out how to wire on top of that and how to engage it, right? So, what's the problem I'm solving? I'm solving the ability to engage the machine in a natural voice language and have it go do all of that stuff actionably, right?
Right.
Siri brings up a website and struggles to be actionable on that. This capability is saying, I'm going to change the whole operating system and how I interact with all the applications to become actionable on today's applications. So that inventiveness that you talked about, right? The ability as a developer to look at that interface and the problem I'm solving and make it better tomorrow than it was today is so crucial for who we are as the human species. Otherwise, we'd still have a bunch of drop down boxes instead of Airbnb's elegance. Some of the widgets that Airbnb has put inside their application that make it really functional to use would have never got invented if the guy said, man, just, you know, copy it the same way it's been done a million times.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I did a podcast, not a collaborative one, a solo podcast some time ago, where I said I think I titled it "It's Just a Button" or something along those lines. Because I feel very strongly about it when someone says, "Hey, it's just a button." Nope, right? Where you place the button, the size of the button, what the text you have on the button, the color, the context to where the buttons are, or how similar or not so similar it is to the rest of the buttons on the same application. All of them make a lot of difference. And I think I want to iterate the word passion that you said there, because if there could be two UI developers, imaginary ones, one of them could say, you know what, it's just a button, it works, I'm going to slap the button on the page and be done with it. The other one takes a bit more pain. And I'm not saying, people misconstrue passion with how long it takes to doing something. That is not true, right? Just because you do it quick and dirty doesn't mean it's quick. Someone else could do it better, quicker, and also cheaper in the long run. So I think it's important to recognize the element of passion. But in the context of what you're saying, Kramer, let's say I take a problem. I I made it sound as though I could take a problem and a solution from someplace else and apply to it and make quick money and grow. But is there a downside to it? Am I homogenizing, if that's the right word, the problem? Meaning, are we all so similar between nations and countries and cultures that problems are that similar and solutions can be very similar? Or are we all pretty unique as people and peoples and cultures that even if the problem is the same, the solution is going to have to be dramatically different? I mean, where is it? Or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, and I think this is this interesting landscape of why technology is going to be done by technology better than mankind over time, right? Because what we do as humans and what we solve as humans in the social space and how we solve it, right? And then how we interlay technology onto that social space makes the problems that we deal with at least eclectically the same. What does that mean? So my 9-year-old daughter and your 9-year-old daughter experienced many of the same things. Why? Because they went to school. They had to interact with social relationships in a much similar fashion. They had access to people who had ideas about how a 9-year-old girl should eat and how she should play with her friends and how her friends perceived her and what she brought into school when she had her lunchbox and opened it up. As she dealt with those social problems, there's a lot of similarity to it, right? And that similarity is dealt with culturally different in Mexico than it is in India, than it is in the US, than it is in China. So while they dealt with the same problems, there's a vast difference because of the social and economic conditions under which they're dealing. But the technology things, I got to pay for my lunch, is very similar because I've got an economic system that looks the same. Fiat currency, I walk up to a register, I got a point of sale system. But what's happening in the automated economy is there's becoming drastic differences to how those operate. So, who would have said in their wildest dreams that El Salvador would be the first Bitcoin economy?
Right.
In what dream would have anyone said 15 years ago that that would happen? Someone would have said Singapore or, one of these super advanced economies would say, let's do this. This is an amazing outcome. It's going to change everything, right? What was the problem that El Salvador had to deal with? Well, the problem was their wallet wasn't big enough to carry enough cash to buy, a carton of milk. As the value of what they used for their economic exchange got crushed, they had to solve the problem. Now, they solved it with some traditional economic thought processes, right? So it's not like they didn't have to think through the same economic conditions that other countries are facing right now in their economic financial situation. But they did so aggressively with intent. So to your point, are we all that same? Are we all alike that the problems we face are going to be similar? I think they are going to be similar. I think, however, with technology, the ability to take something that you've built and reuse it somewhere else to solve a similar problem is one of the probably the primary capability we have to accelerate what's happening in the automated economy. Because we're not trying to build a different payment gateway system across all the countries, but you may have different payment gateway providers in that economy. Let's take China. The tax laws in China and what you do as you process onto a digital cart there is different. How you have to report what you've spent, how that tax goes into the golden tax rules that they have, how that all processes is different. But you still have to have that digital transaction occur. So therefore, their gateway services and how they're dealt with and how they process that, how they feed the information into the government for taxing purposes looks much different. So they've got to deal with it in a little different way, even though they've still got that digital medium that they have to deal with. So the problem's the same. The answer for how to fix the problem and the conditions is different. And I think those differences are going to allow us to start to see, I'm going to call it difference correlation as we become more global, get driven down into the growth factors across economies.
Kramer, I'll add a couple of more things to just said. Cash on delivery, as you probably know, in India, right, and other parts of, I think, Asia, South Asia, that's something that I don't think we still have here because there's not a need. We need delivery, but there was no notion of cash on delivery. And for folks who are watching this who don't live in that part of the world, are not aware of that construct. What it means is you place an order, you don't pay for it by credit card upfront. You actually pay at the time someone delivers it at your house, or at your office. Now, that is very unique to nations. The problem is the same. You want something delivered, like you just mentioned, but the solution has a certain nuance to it. But that small, quote unquote, nuance changes how you solve this problem entirely. How do you solve a cash on delivery problem with e commerce than something that you pay for upfront? So that's the creativity and the localization, if you will. Because if I sat here, because my next point was going to be, my question was, okay, so there is an element of commonality between these countries. We are all humans and people. At least on planet Earth, we are all very similar. Other planets, other galaxies, who knows? Uh, but there are differences between how we are raised, our cultures, that makes a separation between how the solution should be. So my question to you, Kramer, is, if I sat here and built it, I mean, the reason Amazon.com is big here, but I don't know exactly the numbers, but I don't know if they're just as big in other countries. Probably not so much. They've had to partner, I reckon, with other local companies. So if I said that if I could sit in a country and solve problems meaningfully in other nations, in the context of localization and outside, is that possible, or is that wishful thinking?
Well, let's step back for just a second because you reemphasize something that is crucial to this conversation as we've talked about that automated economy. And do I start from scratch or do I take what's already being invented and I use that as an entrepreneur to introduce it? Okay. COD is a great example of a situation that happens in that economy and happens in the Indian economy for some very specific reasons. One is much of the actual people that are buying the retail services or goods get paid in cash. And the transactional system there that actually operates through the banking system, right, is not as prevalent for a lot of the workers that are involved in actually paying for the COD services. But they want the COD service. But let's say I'm a young entrepreneur, right? I just left the equivalent of a Stanford in India, and I'm looking at how do I help this culture that I have, this set of people that I have? How do I help them get to a better way of life and something that's more meaningful to them, right? Well, I look at that COD problem and I go back 3 steps. Okay, why do I pay the laborer with paper? What causes that? And how do I solve that? And if I did solve it, does it really solve a problem? Well, I think it solves a couple of problems. One, it lets you have um, economic transactions occur in a much more fluid manner and in a way that you can now take that remittance that you get and push it around your systems much more effectively, right? I'm earning money. I want to send it to my parents. My parents are in northern India and I'm in southern India. And I get paid mostly in cash. So I've got to go find a remittance station. I got to turn that digital. I got to send it digital. They got to go to that remittance station. They got to pick it up. But there is some entrepreneur right now who's saying, how do I accelerate the payment systems that we get paid as the common worker so that I don't have to deal with the cash anymore, right? So if we step back and look at the question about how does an entrepreneur help accelerate, that's a perfect example of something that's been solved. It's not being solved for some very basic premise reasons inside the economy. There's probably some solutions already come online for that, but there's a lot of factors involved in how you make all of that accelerate. Now, to get back to the question you had about how do I look at that problem set and how do I take that problem set and simplify it into something that I can conditionally solve in a local basis? And does that local basis make sense to do a different way? I think some of the greatest inventions New Zealand invented the debit card. They invented the whole bloody process for how the debit card works. But if you go into New Zealand today and you think of how we deal with credit card transactions, they aren't as efficient as we are. So while they introduced the first technology and how it operates, they didn't necessarily evolve it the same way. And we're going to see those things at each one of these economic factors that are starting to show up in our world at large. And then as globalization, and I know there's a lot of debate about whether or not we're becoming more nationalistic or we're staying global, right? But as the world has to start to evolve things across cultures where things are being advanced quicker, I think the barriers are just going to get uh, pulled down faster and faster and faster. And the places for entrepreneurs, for people like you and I, and people that are listening to our podcast that want to jump in and become meaningful inside that space, they're going to learn what we call digital enablement. And that construct of digital enablement helps accelerate the entrepreneurial person who's passionate about a problem. May not mean that it's one that hasn't been solved, but they're still passionate about it. They're passionate about how to introduce it and bringing it to their network of people, right? There's friends, there's families, there's people I'm trying to solve this problem for, right? And they're doing so in a way that is that fits that economic situation. Here's what I really liked. We thought food trucks were really cool in the U.S. when they started popping up. I remember
Right.
the very first food truck that I ever got to go to was in Chennai, and this was, I don't know, 30 years ago, but it was pretty common, right? That
Right.
food was brought to the site and that I would go up and I'd buy that. And I thought, well, that's really elegant. I like the way that worked. You know, food was brought to me, right? And that food was brought to me. Today, that food brought to me conditioned in the US is mostly Uber Eats. And the food truck is an experiential thing that they bring them together and your kids are playing around and you're
Right.
going to the food trucks, right? And in India, it's pretty common that food come to you, right? And we're also experiencing delivery of food services. I don't know how long the India Food Delivery Network has been around and delivered food economically and in massive scale across that economy. There, Uber Eats was there, I don't know, 50 years ago, right?
Yeah,
I don't know
it was
how
not called that.
it
So,
wasn't
but
called Uber Eats.
Kramer, does that mean? But back to what I'm asking also is,
Yeah,
can I build software or solutions or digital enablement that we're talking about for another country by actually by not having a presence there? Is that
100%.
possible?
100%. We see it every day, and we're seeing it more and more as um, as the boundaryless nature is starting to occur. Right? Silicon Valley in the U.S. was the great frontier for solving technology solutions in the U.S. But we're seeing more and more entrepreneurs out of Sweden, a lot out of Sweden, a lot out of India. Some of the best software in the world, Zoho. I don't know how many users are on Zoho today,
Right.
right? Okay, so and that software, there's probably more users for Zoho in the US and in Europe than India. And it was built, founded, started out of India, and it's been a product of India for a very long time, right? And so we're seeing solution sets come out of other countries as they look at the global scale of a problem and say, how do I fix that problem?
So, which means, how do I? But we do agree that there is a notion of localization, and things like cash on delivery wouldn't be found out unless you were closely connected to the parts of the world that we're selling or doing business in. So, how do we bridge that gap between this boundaryless global world that we seem to be living in? Yet cultures may not change or certainly do not change at the pace that technology changes. So what if I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm a startup, I don't have all the money to have offices and businesses everywhere that I'm doing business in, or I want to do business in. So what would your recommendation be? Where do I start? How small do I start? And how do I try to not be surprised about cash on delivery? I could have built the world's best software trying to sell that in India and it falls short because I'd missed the fundamental essence of transactions in India, which was cash on delivery. because those mistakes happen all the time. What would your recommendation be to people to actually try to at least mitigate or minimize the number of such mistakes that happen to be made?
Yeah, so a key construct of the automated economy, and this construct now is becoming um, accelerated. I'm going to say a key construct of the automated economy is the understanding of the transactional states against all the conditions that that automation has to occur. Okay. And that includes the end consumer. How am I going to do that transaction? Digitally, non digitally. And let's back up with an example of that. Okay. If you want to have a high growth capability through the solution that you have, and let's say that high growth capability is cosmetics. I want to make the best cosmetics in the world. Okay. What does that mean to you? That means I've got to understand 170 different cultures and how the use of cosmetics is going to show up to have the best cosmetics in the world. So, first and foremost, you better have a passion for that. Has cosmetics been solved before? Oh, it's been solved before in many ways. But the best cosmetics in the world solution may look different than the best cosmetics in any one country. So, as you think about what you want to be as an entrepreneur, do I want to be global? Do I want to be local? Do I want to be hyper efficient for a small community that is maybe 10,000 or 20,000, right? You know, how many buyers of digital wheelchairs will there be across the globe versus how many buyers of electric cars are there going to be? But is there a market for digital wheelchairs, right? Well, what is a digital wheelchair, you say? It's a wheelchair that when I sit down, I tell it the source that I'm at, the destination that I'm at, and it automatically drives me there, right? And I'm an entrepreneur. I think this is a great idea. Well, what does that look like in India with different streets, different population characteristics than if you were going to a country where the streets maybe had 15 people on them at any one point in time, right? So as you think about the entrepreneur you want to be and you think about the solution that you're building, one, don't forget the automated economy is here. And you want to be in that, or you're going to have a very short existence to what you're building, right? I was talking to someone the other day and I was explaining to them that being in the software business is risky. Why? Because all software dies. All software dies. If you look
And
back,
sometimes sooner than you want for it to.
sometimes sooner than you want for it to, all software dies. And so as you evolve, right, what you're evolving is into the different set of what the software's capabilities have to be. And if you don't evolve fast enough, you're still going to die. So what's a good long-term business strategy then, right? That long-term business strategy is the ability to understand what does automation look like in its next series of evolutions, and how do I take advantage of those next series of evolutions inside the economic or the problems. Let's start with the problems that I'm trying to solve. And so if we look at I think we talked last time about GDP growth based on how fast the economy is going to get automated, and the opportunity to be a part of that as an entrepreneur and become a part of accelerating into that automated economy, right? So
Right.
as you are a let's say you're an entrepreneur that wants to help accelerate that automated economy, and you want to do so in a um, economic condition like India, because there's probably 10 or 15 like economies. They may not have as many in the population set, but they're in the same condition as what it looks like within India. So as you start to build out your solution set and you want to go global with that solution set, and you have to understand the conditions of those buyers, you have to take consideration around your entrepreneurship with three things. The risk of failure has gone down and nobody noticed. So fail fast. Test it quick, quick. And if you want to test it somewhere else, test it quick. It's not going to kill you if it's $2,500 on a credit card. Number two, thought leadership. Don't become myopic. Don't be hampered by boundaries that are put in what people built as silos in how they were thinking about things, right? For example, cross bank transactions. I was talking last week with someone about cross bank transactions. Most banking apps wire up to a single bank. Why is that? Why does a banking app wire up to a single bank? Why can't I get a banking app that wires up to 10 different banks in 15 different countries, lets me move my money around, right? And so we were doing a design session on this. Um, and 45 days later, we were wired up to 4 banks in 3 countries. No one had ever asked the question before. No one had ever sat down and thought about it before. Now, what does that mean? We never really thought about it. But as we took the advantage of what that does, we're moving remittance on the phone now between those banks, so I can move my payment systems around. And and this was the guy that thought this thing up. He's like 22, and he just asked the question: how come I have to have 5 banking apps on my phone? Why can't I have one banking app on my phone? And the list of problems we had to go through and solve, there were a lot, right? But
Right.
within that one banking app, he can now get his money from Chase, pull it down into his wallet, okay? Take that money from Chase that he's pulled down into his wallet. There's a unique way he did that, by the way. I can take that and put it into HSBC, so on and so forth. So I think as we evolve around what we want to solve and how we want to solve those things that are the future of what's going to occur as an entrepreneur, we've got to find our passion. We've got to think about what the automated economy is limited by and find solutions to how those problems occur and be elegant at being able to understand. And what do I mean by elegance? Because that's a big word. Elegance, when you see elegance, no one tells you it's elegant. You know it's elegant. You just look at it and go, oh my gosh, that's elegant. And elegance means different things to different people, right? But when you see it, you know it. And you start tapping other people and you go, look at this, whatever that look at this is. It might be jewelry if you're, the wives, or it might be
Right.
a golf clubs. It might be a myriad of things, but that elegance is self nominating. No one has to guess at it. And so as we build elegant solutions, we think about that and we put that at the top of our mind. I remember the first time I engaged with you. There were 2 things that will always stand out in my mind. One, I'm not going to build anything shitty. So don't even ask me to. If you're going to cut corners, I'm not your guy. Number 2, when I build it, it's built to last. And that is the entrepreneurial spirit. And that, thinking about that in the scope of what we have in our global automated economy, is what every entrepreneur should take to heart as they're starting to look at how to solve the problems that can be put on a vast stage and shared across the global economy.
Kramer, I want to add to what you said there because I remember many things vividly about the time we worked together as well. And my wife and I have this exchange all the time. We hadn't known each other at the time, right? Complete strangers, entirely so. But I would never play poker with you because you read people beautifully. I would lose my money. Uh, but I always feel like, you read on the situation, how to approach the solving of problems, and the level of trust that you're able to place and thereby giving people the freedom to execute are things that are easier said than done. This is not a class that you can unfortunately teach where you tell, there's only so
Yeah.
much you can teach. Some things have to come naturally. So but I think I want people to have that learning and takeaway, saying, hey, you have a read on the situation. You provide that flexibility as a company to say, hey, this is the problem we want to solve. Let's do it iteratively to the best, to the best that we possibly can, but yet giving people the freedom to execute, which is very important. You know what I mean? Personally, I think you're
Yes.
very good at many things. This is one of them that I've had the experience of enjoying, which is have a read on the situation and then give the flexibility to solving the problems, because there is no better way to solve these problems. Because micromanaging, it's a different topic, which I probably want to talk to you about as well, just as a topic, what it means and what when it's good or not so good. I just want to add that sort of arbitrarily because you had mentioned it. But going back to, so what you're saying here, tell me if my recap is more or less accurate. in the notion of in the world of automated economy, from an engineering standpoint, it's all right to not be super creative. It's all right to look at other problems that other people have solved in other parts of the world, try to recreate those solutions as long as those problems are reasonably applicable to the parts of the world that you're located or you're selling in. Make the customizations and the localization so it's more applicable to that population. And how you find out that it needs to be localized is to each their own. Because let's say you're building a food app in India. There are communities in India that you probably might know, Kramer, that do not eat onions, for instance. I come from the part of the country, the southern part of the country, where most people do, but I know that in northwest of India, people there's communities that who would not eat onions. So if you create an app and you treated onion as an example, as just one of the other ingredients, like you would treat a pizza app, for instance, that's not going to be particularly very well localized in my mind, because there are religious reasons as well. I mean, if I could make fun of my own people, everything about what we do has some reason that we not everyone understands, but we still follow the rituals because it's coming down like tens of thousands of years. So if you built an app that treated onion like a tomato, or like a mushroom, it will not come closer to the person who has different reasons for not eating those onions in the first place. So I think, I know what your thoughts are. I think localization could be a make or break for solutions that you build. Or am I over stressing the importance of localization?
No, and what is the automated economy's three key components? Hyper automation, hyper personalization, and data driven decisions. If you don't consider, every entrepreneur who's listening to this, consider those three things at the deepest of your heart. Because what you just said was hyper personalization, right? You have to understand the aspects of the consumer, the person that's using whatever it is, whether it's a drive-through car washing machine, right? Or it's an application for buying food. If you don't understand hyper personalization, you're not going to succeed. And I'm not talking personalization, I'm talking hyper personalization. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to the makeup, okay? And let's go back to, let's say you want to sell makeups and you want to build technology that helps you sell your makeup, right? As you build that technology and you train it with AI and the AI data sets that you're training it with, you've got to go into localization on those data sets, because skin colors, facial architecture. And what do I mean by facial architecture? The commonality that's done through bloodlines in a different area. All of these things matter to how the makeup is going to look on you or not look on you. And so if I'm trying to sell makeup that is going to sell well in the north of France, where there's a lot of light skin, more narrow facial structures, or I'm going to sell something that is in Africa, where I've got a little bit darker skin and I've got a little bit bolder structures. I've got to make certain that I have that hyper personalization, understand all the way down to the details. And why is that possible to do today? The technology is so much more advanced. I can see the pores on your skin with the mobile apps that we now have. And so I can start to help accelerate in a global basis this application, as long as I keep in the back of my mind, it's got to be hyper personalized. So you got to learn what personalization means. I was talking to someone who they do payment services for movies. Um, large, they pay the actors, they pay all the staff that does all the work on the set, so on and so forth. And they thought, oh, this would be cool if we went and solved the time card problem. Okay. And we'll put the time card solution in the app and we're going to build this for our customers. And then they took it to their customer and their customer was like, I don't want that. I don't want to have the person have to put an app on their phone. Who's going to deal with that, right? I got actors that get paid $4 million a year and they'll put the app on their phone and use it. I got actors that get paid $4 million a year. They're not going to ever use a cell phone, let alone put the app on it. So that punch card over there works just fine. So you really have to understand now more than ever as an entrepreneur, who is your buyer? What do they care about? How do they want to operate? Because your buyer wants three things. I want what I want. I want it the way I want it as valuable as I want it. And they want that hyper automated, hyper personalized, and data driven decisions. And if you take those six constructs, you build them into the core of who you are as you're building solutions, whether they're technology solutions that you're going to build into an app, whether they're solutions that you build into your clothing line, whether they're solutions that you build into a new housing construct that's going to be foldable and it's going to open itself up and it's going to be readily available on your lot. Whatever you do, you got to keep those concepts in mind because that's what the automated economy is all about.
Okay, so let me ask you a difficult question. Uh, where is, I want to say legalities and ethics because you took cosmetics as an example. Slightly, it's a very important and interesting topic. Disclaimer: if this is controversial, please, please answer to the extent you can or want to, Kramer. So, cosmetics, and you said localization, right? And I want to talk ethics and legality and ethics. And to me, legality is easier. You have the laws of the land, and we all follow the laws of the land as good citizens. All right, that to me is straightforward. The laws are written, you read, interpret them, you follow. But the ethics is not so much that's written, right? It's very subjective. And let me take an example. I'm not manufacturing this, so it's not on me if this example is controversial. When you talk cosmetics and you talk some countries, I'll take India as an example, the country I come from. Even today, not so much when I grew up, that was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But even today, I was reading something very recently. They actually have skin whitening creams in India, not just in India, in South Asia, and a lot
In
of
a
the
lot of
countries in
countries.
South Asia.
Yep.
Now, if you're selling cosmetics, you took, say France as an example and India as an example. Now, if a company was building software in France, there is no way in the world that they're ever going to think about something like this, right? From an even ethics standpoint, not something that would even cross their minds, for instance. But then when you take it, when somebody is building this in India, I mean, you could have some. I've seen some articles that are so preposterous that I can't even share it in the podcast, where you can actually build quote unquote solutions to problems that are non-existential. You know what, skin lightening is not a problem. It's not a problem you're solving, right?
That's right.
It's a different thing that you're solving something that's not a problem, that shouldn't be a problem to begin with. So how do I wade these delicate waters as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, where I want to build solutions that's hyper personalized, not just to individuals but also to communities, but still can sleep peacefully at night, where I feel like I built something that's not just good, that's not just scalable, that's not just extensible, that's not just everything that's in the space of engineering, but it's also in the space of ethics, if I can use that word loosely. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on what we have to be cognizant of as folks who are building solutions.
Yeah, this is a really good question. And this is a question that's going to come up a lot more as the term ethics takes a new set of meanings that has both political derivatives as well as social and emotional derivatives. So, and as I'm going to call it science experts, people that are in our space, right? We're building technologies quite often that we feel really good about because they do something that helps accelerate the value you're getting as you engage whatever it is that we're trying to do for you, right? And so if we stick with the topic of cosmetics, for example, right? And we have solutions that we're building to try to allow you to see which cosmetics are going to look good on you, see what advantage that may have with clothes that you want to wear with it, with jewelry that you want to wear with it, with your glasses, your hair color, all the things that associate with that, right? And as you're making decisions about what to enable inside that application, right? The construct of ethics has to come up as you're doing so, right? And so there's kind of two pieces of ethic modeling as you think about technology solutions that you have to be very conscious of when you're hyper personalizing something. One is what am I going to allow from what I call feature robustness things I can turn on and off, and you let the discretion of the consumer make the choice. And hyper-personalization is going to have to increase what that is as we move into our future generations that are looking at more options as to how we live as humans. So the personalization of the features that let you make choices are going to go up. And you can't forget that. You have to be enabled to do so. For example, if I'm someone that says, hey, I want to make certain that this is going to look good on my skin color, and I want to change my skin color for whatever reason, and I want an option to vary that skin color, you want to make certain you put the option at the discretion of the consumer. You don't force it into that app, and the consumer doesn't get to make a choice on it. Therefore, the treatment of that ethical decision is at the discretion of that consumer versus purposefully put into the application in a way that doesn't work right. So
Right.
facial recognition systems have struggled at dealing with different structures and skin colors because the models that they were trained on didn't have the right characteristics in them to show diversity across what it was that the facial recognition system had to overlay into how it operated. So you've got to be able to think of that when you're hyper personalizing something. So that's the first thing. One, let those ethics decisions be made in the options you put in the software. Two, make certain that you're discriminatory on how you present information to the consumer as you produce the software. So, what does that mean? Well, that means I download the software, I understand its purpose and use, and I've opted in to the construction of the purpose and use. And once you opt into the construction, you know what you're getting into. Okay. I have three religious sources. I read the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Bible. I read them all diligently. Why? I get different things from them as I consume them, right? And the literary sense of those things that I get from them have different opportunities for me as I look at the construct and I look at the things that are associated with them. As I start to interpret them and I communicate them, I've started to put these different applications together because I've got a community of people who are interested in exchanging ideas across different religious sources, right? But whenever you download that app and you consume it, I warn you right up front. I'm not here to offend you. I don't take a position necessarily until I do. And that position is usually thoughtful. I've put a lot of aggregated information and data together as I make that, as I construct that decision. But I give you the option to say, you're going to opt into this content, check. B, I give you hyper personalization within the content, right? There's 3 or 4 flavors of the Bible, NIV, so on and so forth. I know that Quran's supposed to only have one flavor, but there's 2 or 3 flavors of the Quran that are available, right? Bhagavad Gita only has one flavor of Bhagavad Gita. So these things, that as I put them into the application, I give you the options in there to let you take your own ethical decisions around how you're going to interact with those applications. That's super critical in our ability to get as high of an uptake on what we're sharing in the community that we're sharing it with, and allowing them to make the choices around those ethical decisions and the legal decisions.
And what you say there, Kramer, is important for everybody, but more so for certain stakeholders in a company, right? If I'm in an engineering team building software, I'm building React pages or Go APIs, then maybe my awareness to some of this, I can choose to be ignorant, even though I shouldn't be. I'm saying I can afford the luxury of ignorance in some cases, but not so much if I'm in the product team, for instance, right? If I'm
Right.
in the product team, then I'm defining what is getting built. And as it turns out, and this is just a suggestion, if you will, to developers out there, I've worked with engineers who were very good, but they would do whatever it is that you ask for them to solve without questioning or even trying to sometimes understand the
The
larger
ramifications.
problems that are out there. Now, I'm not saying that when somebody gives you a task to do, ask questions about all the customers, who's using it, why not, because nothing will ever get done. At the same time, when you're staying at a place for a little bit of time, whether as a consultant or as a full-time employee, I think it's important to understand what you're building and who you're building it for. because you mentioned passion more than once, and I feel very strongly about it as well. Because unless you have that, everybody in the company, they say everyone is a salesperson, even if you don't wear the sales hat. Similarly, I think everyone needs to sort of understand the problem that they're solving. So if you're addressing an automated economy in China versus India versus Ghana versus the US versus New Zealand, you need to have some fundamental understanding of those economies, as at least if you're in a startup, in a larger organization, probably there's other people who have to deal with that headache. But in smaller companies, you don't get to have the luxury of just wearing one hat ever. You're going to have
That's
to
right.
wear these multiple hats, for instance. So I had a couple of other things that I want to touch upon, because you mentioned Uber Eats and DoorDash. I had some questions regarding automated economy, these products, and the kind of impact that they have on other economies, outside of what they're actually solving. Because, Uber Eats is meant for food, DoorDash, similar. I had a few other things, but I feel we are like 70 some minutes into this conversation. So it might be a topic to sort of pick up on. But just as a heads up, this is what I want to at least explore with you the next time, which is, these are products, Uber Eats, DoorDash. I'm sure maybe it's there in other countries as well, or equivalents of these products. I want to talk a little bit about the products, their differences from a business standpoint, how there is room for more than one and not just one, even though they seem to be solving the same problems. How somebody else could take these ideas and build similar solutions, but hyper personalize it, if you will, to other parts of the world. Are there solutions out there in the African continent, in South Asia, and down under? Or are these becoming, because I know you had mentioned that some of the things that we've had for years in the US, you mentioned that you just noticed that they're becoming popular, like say in New Zealand when we last spoke. So I want to talk about those items, and also the impact that it has on other aspects. Like, if I'm ordering food through Uber Eats, as opposed to me taking the car and driving down to the restaurant or to the shop, that means it has an impact on other things, uh, like the car industry, for instance, maybe fuel, maybe other things, other economies that I could have played a role in. Now I'm not playing a role because I'm actually getting food delivered to my house. So I want to talk about all of those aspects in our next conversation. But to wrap up today's topic, I'm going to title that automated economy in India, because I think a fair part of our discussion and our conversation centered around India as a growing economy, and cultures and whatnot. Uh, what would be your closing comments and thoughts, Kramer, for to sort of summarize the conversation we've had in this podcast?
One thing I think that's super important that we continue to reemphasize for all of our listeners. One, technology is a big piece of what we're talking about. But if you think of, I call these four dimensions. There's the organization, and I call it organization instead of people because we're going to have digital sapiens in the future that are a part of our organization. So we got to start to think of them as not just human oriented, but digital oriented. Okay. What does that mean? Economic change in India has been embraced by the Indian leadership to start to change norms on how things are done within the economy, simplifying, removing bureaucracy, taking out things that make it very difficult to navigate the business landscape within India. All of that stuff has nothing to do with technology. It has to do with the people construct that's important to understand as the automated economy kicks in and you want to take advantage of it. So kudos to the leadership within India as they start to make those changes that have nothing to do with tech. They have to do with how does India operate at a governance and its governmental societies, right? The second thing, methods and procedures, right? Instead of SOPs, I call it methods and procedures because the methodologies we choose to embrace and the procedures that reinforce those are super important as we move into the automated economy. For example, in the US today, we still don't have the full adoption of titling. You still have to get someone to go sign the title. I saw my first set of digital titles about a month and a half ago where we just took the process and digitized it, right? That's a huge plus because one of the largest economic assets in any country is its land, right? And therefore, as you start to adopt these methods and procedures, and you think about how those methods and procedures are going to accelerate your economic evolution, you want to take out all the junk that's been in the trunk. You said something about we do it the same way because it's been done so for 10,000 years, right? And some cultures have that deep, deep, deep. My wife's from Mexico, and there's certain cultural norms there that have been there forever. They're not going to shift anytime soon. But you have to really think about those. That's the second thing. The third thing then are the systems and technologies that support those. So systems and technology is number 3 on the list of how you operate into that automated economy. And so while we didn't give a lot of space and time discussing that about India, one of the things that are key to its growth is the ability for it to start to embrace how it's operating both in its own economy and its governance and how it's taking that abroad. And what does that mean? That means both from a social and religious aspect, right? How do we start to open up who we are to the other worlds that we deal with? The partnership between Dubai or the UAE and India, and how there's an embracing of different religious cultures that's happening between the two of them, and the economic factors that are going to start to become a part of that, I think are amazing examples of what has to happen to get an automated economy to boost up and pick up your GDP and increase it at an ever expanding rate. So I don't want to lose sight of that as we close. The organizational things that are done, both at the government level, governance, high end stuff, both, and the personal level, as your education system adopts what it's doing, right? The second thing, as those methods and procedures, then the third thing is technology, systems and technologies. And then the metrics and the key performance indicators that say all of that's working together. I want to leave us with that thought and to start to observe those economies that have grown and grown substantially, understanding how those things operate in those economies as entrepreneurs. As we start to understand those, then we can embrace what you just said. How do we become meaningful in the impact that we can have while observing the key components of that economy that we want to do it in and not offending that culture, offending things that matter to the space that we're operating in? So I think that would be what I'd want to leave our listeners with as we close out the session.
Perfect. Thanks, Kramer. Again, folks, Kramer is the founder and chief operative officer of Cooperative Computing. I leave the links to Kramer's company and Kramer's LinkedIn profile on the podcast, as we always do. Until next time, Kramer, have a wonderful weekend.
You bet. Next Friday. See ya.
Thank you.